I'd like to call to order the regular council evening meeting for Monday, February 27th, 2023. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming on the District of Summerland YouTube channel. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Corporate officer, any late items? No late items. If I could get an approval of the agenda. Councillor Van Elfen and Councillor Betts, all in favor. That carries. Consent agenda. Would anybody like to remove anything from the consent agenda? No? If I get somebody to approve, motion to approve. Councillor Peak, Councillor Van Elfen, all in favor. That carries. Mayor's report. Family Day was the weekend before last, and along with the district's traditional free public swimming and free public skating, I hope some of you were able to take in the Celebrate Summerland event on the 18th. It was one of a series of 7 celebrations put on in 7 different communities by the Thompson Okanagan Tourism Association. The idea was to celebrate the region's people and culture and mark the reopening of the region post-pandemic. The Chamber of Commerce and the District of Summerland partnered to bring it to Summerland. Like Light Up, Celebrate Summerland was another example of the Chamber and District working together to put on an exciting event for the whole community to enjoy. Speaking of the Chamber, a reception for the nominees of the Business Excellence Awards was held this past Thursday at the Waterfront Resort. Congratulations to the 56 businesses that received the nomination. Both the quantity and quality of the nominees in all categories is very high, and it's especially encouraging to see so many new younger business owners up for an award. As I said at the reception, I'm glad I don't have a say in choosing the winners. If it was up to me, I'd give a prize to everybody. The award recipients will be announced at the awards ceremony at Center Stage Theatre on April 1st. I'm told it'll be a denim and diamonds event. I won't have a problem with a denim, but I may need to borrow some of Councillor Barkwell's diamonds. Incidentally, the District of Summerland was nominated for a Chamber Award in the Environment Sustainability category. I don't know who nominated us, and I don't know if the municipality has ever been nominated for a Chamber Award in the past, but it's an honor. Summerland is also being recognized for our positive environmental impact at the national level. We have been named by Earth Day Canada as the 2023 spokesperson for its Mobilizing Municipalities campaign. The City of Montreal served as the first municipal spokesperson in 2020. Then it was Mississauga in 2021, Moncton last year, and now Little Summerland is once again punching above its weight. Being spokesperson means that I, as mayor, am supposed to encourage other mayors to get their municipalities involved in the annual Earth Day campaign. I have already sent an email out to all the other mayors in the interior, and I'll start reaching out to others in the province and across the country. I'll be participating in the national online campaign launch on March 22nd, which is 1 month to the day before Earth Day itself on April 22nd. Please check out the Earth Day video featuring Summerland, which is now up on the Earth Day Canada website, and it can also be accessed through the district's Facebook page. Environmental issues such as water conservation and flood mitigation were also among the priorities identified in RDOS strategic planning that Councillor Van Elfen and I participated in last Wednesday and Thursday. At the RDOS board meeting the previous week on February 16th, the RCMP provided its 2022 annual report for the region. There has been a downward trend in almost all crime, including violent crime and property crime. The Summerland detachment received 2,558 calls for service last year, compared to 3,086 calls in 2021. About 3,000 calls has been the average since 2016. It was reported that in every community, the majority of crimes, especially stolen vehicles and break-and-enters, are committed by one or two prolific offenders. When they're locked up, the crime rate goes down. When they're released, the crime rate goes back up. So it's always good to remember to lock your doors. And that's my report, and I'll turn it over to the CEO for his.
Thank you, Your Worship. As an update regarding the Domestic Second Services Project, an initial batch of choice letters have now proceeded to 240 property owners in the community with these unmetered second water services. Because we require an understanding of who wants to keep those second water services before we turn on the water this year, we'll also send a second batch of letters through registered mail shortly. We have been responding to inquiries and questions, and we'll further update the Q&A document as a resource for those who will need to make a decision on the future of their service. We'll continue to schedule out the work in such a way as it works with our crews and their busy workload. With the 2023 financial plan being adopted by Council today, and because of the guidance Council has already provided with the creation of your 2022 to 2026 strategic priorities, the administration will now action our work plan to accomplish these goals. One item includes the removal of the Kiwanis Pier, which has been determined by qualified engineering consultants to be in disrepair and a public safety issue. The 2023 budget includes $200,000 for both the removal of the existing structure and the preparation of several design options for Council's consideration. Council's approved waterfront master plan acknowledges the value of the pier to the community, and so while we prepare options for Council, we will continue to search for grants that might assist with the potential replacement of the pier. Finally, I just wanted to remind residents that the next public engagement opportunity for the Rodeo Grounds Master Plan is set for tomorrow. Please drop by and share your thoughts anytime from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. at the George Riga Arts and Cultural Center at 9525 Wharton Street. We will have design concepts prepared that reflect the input received so far, and staff and design consultants available to answer your questions. Come out and help shape the future of the rodeo ground site. With that, I conclude my report.
Thank you. Any questions for either of us? No? Then we'll move on to the public comment opportunity. This is for agenda items that are not, don't have a statutory requirement for public input. I have Murray Rooney registered. If you'd like to speak up, come up to the podium, Mr. Rooney. And I ask you to keep it to 2 minutes, and you should be able to see your clock up there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. The proposed delegation, if approved, will result in, I'm speaking to agenda item 9.4. The proposed delegation, if approved, will result in the additional degradation of the basic principles of democracy in Summerland, especially as they relate to the rule of law, transparency and accountability, and citizen participation. I've identified a dozen concerns in the background section of my written submission, which I trust all of you have read and considered. I will not detail these given time restraints, but I will use a hypothetical example of some potential consequences of existing council practices and the new variance delegation. Suppose a party submits a request for variance to reduce the setback requirement. Staff look at the request, but fail to consider how approving that variance is impacted by and impacts upon local bylaws such as zoning or the Good Neighbor bylaw, or provincial laws related to environmental protection and regulations, which the district has some shared jurisdiction over, or the Farm Practices Protection Act, which doesn't apply in this hypothetical case because the party applying for the variance hasn't complied with the normal farming practices as defined by the province. Suppose that a citizen informs staff of their failures and the subsequent consequence of those failures, but staff refused to address their errors of commission or omission before the decision was made by council. Suppose their failure to conduct the proper research and revise their recommendation results in a decision that is contrary to those laws or bylaws and that makes the subsequent enforcement of those bylaws or provincial laws more difficult or even impossible. The new delegation will make the circumstances even more concerning where notice doesn't have to be given to affected parties in all cases. I ask that Council reject the recommendations of staff and instead seek new ways and opportunities to work towards the goal of improving the operation of democracy in Summerland. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody else would like to make a comment on an agenda item? Mr. Bessler, just state your name for the record and which item you'll be speaking to.
I'm just going to follow up on what the gentleman before me said. Brad Bessler, 18816 Garnet Valley Road. I've witnessed staff act in bad faith with respect to bylaw enforcement and that and variances. In particular, Brad Dolavat, and I know you're delegating a lot of authority to him, and I'm really concerned because I have documented evidence of him repeatedly acting in bad faith and breaching district policies, and to give him more power when he wasn't elected, staff were elected. It's not the right move, and just like the gentleman before said, I would encourage you to reject staff's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to make a comment on an agenda item? Don't see any. Could we just get the podium microphone turned off? Thank you, Marianne. We'll move on to development reports now, item 9.1, and we'll turn this over to our planning technician, Shannon Tooney.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Tonight, my first development variance permit was received for the application at 22406 Garnet Valley Road. This application is to allow the side yard setback to be varied from 15 metres to 1.28. The site plans here before you are of the property, showing the location of the property buildings and the noted agricultural building the variance pertains to. This variance is being requested for the continued placement of an agricultural building. This is an existing building that was constructed prior to the current owner's ownership of the property. The official community plan, this property is designated agricultural under our official community plan, which seeks to support residential uses that meet the needs of the farmers, limit the impact of those residencies on farm operations, and encourage higher capability lands for farming. The zoning of the property is zoned A1 large agricultural. And large acreage. This zone requires buildings that house animals, livestock, have a setback of 15 metres. For the discussion of this file, there is an allowance for the continuation of this existing agricultural building. The lands directly to the south of the proposed building are also zoned A2 and are used for agricultural purposes and crop fields. The 50-metre setback regulations are put in place to promote harmonious relationships between farmlands and urban residential lands. All residential buildings on the adjoining lot to the south are sited over 225 metres approximately to the east adjacent to the Garnet Valley Road, as you can see below there. The subject property is also zoned A2, which permits intensive agricultural uses, including the keeping of livestock. The application was circulated to our external relationships with the ALC, Interior Health, and the Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, with no objections or concerns put in place. We therefore recommend that the council authorises insurance of the development various permit DVP 23001 for a property located at 22406 Garnet Valley Road, legally described, and that section 8.2.6 site and regulations of zoning bylaw 200-450B greenhouses and plant nurseries, buildings, structures housing animals, livestock or poultry, livestock feeding stations, mushroom growing facilities, commercial kennels, animal shelters, cannabis production facilities, and all other agricultural intensive uses to part III, minimum yard setback interior of 50 metres, be varied to 1.28 metres to allow for the placement of the existing agricultural building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, any questions? Councillor Van Elfen?
Thank you. Question through to our planner, if I may. Any idea how long this building's existed?
As far as we can look back on our files, it's been 20 plus years.
20 plus years. May I?
Yep.
In your report, it shows 225 meters from the neighboring home.
To Councillor Van Outen, yes, that was an approximate measurement. Obviously, I didn't go out on site, but from our GIS system, I'm able to do a pretty accurate distance between the existing agricultural building that houses livestock to the most nearest residential property, which is to the south.
Thank you.
Councillor Betts.
Thank you through the mayor. I guess I can just say that I appreciate that it was forwarded through to Interior Health, to the ALC, and that they were all recommending that it be approved as it's a longstanding building and they had no concerns. So for me, I have no concerns. Thank you.
Don't see any other questions. Councillor Van Elfen?
Just one more question. What brought this forward? A bylaw complaint?
Yes, to Councillor Van Outen through the mayor. Yes, this was a bylaw file. There was a bylaw complaint that was brought to our attention. The applicant for the DVP then came forward with an application to bring the building into conformance.
Okay, so the history then of this building, it's always been livestock
Yes,
housing.
it's always been an agricultural building.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Peak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to see that in the circulation of this, none of the other agencies found a difficulty with the use in this particular site, and the fact that it has had long-standing placement in this part of the property. I have no difficulty with this going forward.
And just to confirm, so if this building was ever torn down, then the variance is no longer applicable. If they wanted to build another building, they would have to, with that encroach, they would have to apply for another variance?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, I'd like to bring the motion forward as presented with a slight amendment, if I may.
Okay.
The amendment would be, and further that all application fees associated with this development variance permit 23-001, 22406 Garnet Valley Road be waived and refunded to the applicant.
Would I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Peak. We might want some discussion on that. Councillor Van Elfen.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity. Now, in my opinion, if bylaw happened to go to this property and this person was doing some illegal activity, such as an addition to the non-conforming building or possibly a different use than animal husbandry, then I understand. But this applicant had to come forward because of a bylaw complaint to get the variance. And I don't think that burden should be put on that person. They didn't do anything wrong. They bought a property where a building was already existing. So that's my kind of a rationale. Thank you.
Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Respectfully, Councillor Van Alpen, I understand where you're coming from, seeing as this is a longstanding building, but I think that the owner is doing her best to bring her property into conformance with her current understanding of the bylaw, and I think that that's reasonable to expect from our citizens, so I don't support the amendment.
Councillor Barkwell.
I don't think it'll, how do we, can somebody tell me how much money we're talking about in fees and such that proposed to be waived?
Turn that over to our staff.
Yeah, our application fee for development variance permits is $750.
Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah, I have my concerns with the Councillor Van Alphen's amendment to the proposed recommendation, in that if it sets a precedent there that if someone on council doesn't come forward with the suggestion of waiving a fee, if the next person down the road doesn't have the ear of a councillor to make that amendment, I don't think staff would do that on their own unless we instructed staff to say every time variance was required because of a bylaw complaint, we recommend that or the circumstances that they bought the building and such, that the recommendation be waiving the application fee, which gets horribly complicated and all sorts of potential for problems. No, it just, I really understand the reasoning behind it, but I'm really scared of the consequences. So I'll wait to hear some more comments before really making up my mind, if there are any more.
Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you. Appreciate my fellow councillors' concerns. I'm only talking on existing buildings, historic buildings on properties that people purchase that may be not in conformance, setback wise. I'm not talking about bylaw infractions where a neighbor complains because a guy's putting an addition on his building, and that's, triggers bylaw to go there. And then, no, I don't agree with waiving those. I only agree with waiving of historic, because there's tons of buildings all throughout Summerland, especially in the agricultural areas, that are buildings that are non-conforming because they're too close to property lines. So, every person has to come forward, or every person has to come and get a variance at their cost because a building was built 20, 30 years ago. I mean, I can understand getting a variance if I want to change the use or possibly putting an addition on, but just because a neighbor complains, I should be having a fee charged that I didn't do nothing wrong. I just bought a piece of property, and the same use is still the same use. Haven't changed the use, but with this variance, if that goes through, now they could have dog kennels, cannabis production, and everything.
I guess the challenge, I hear where you're coming from, Councillor Van Alphen. I guess the challenge, though, as Councillor Barkwell identified, is if there's that many that you say, then that's a lot of fees we're waiving, and if that's the case, maybe we ought to have a policy on that as opposed to a one-off thing. It's when you go when you go purchase a property, you're supposed to do your due diligence, and And you should know these sort of things when you buy a property that you're encroaching or you know, it might not be, there might be something wrong with the property. Of course, you don't always know that, but, you know, hopefully people go into purchasing properties with their eyes open and find out about these sort of things so they're aware when they're purchasing a property. So I'm concerned about the precedents it might set as well. And if we want to change something, then that's a policy discussion. Any other, Councillor Peak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The difficulty I have with this is that it is a structure that has existed with the same use for that number of years. And that for there to be a complaint to come along that that is complaining about the use and the distance at this point, it seems arbitrary. That's why I would consider the waiving of the fees.
Yeah, it's difficult. Councillor Barkwell.
Council isn't legally bound by precedent. So that part, but we're morally bound to be consistent. And I'm worried about the future and other situations. And the next person who gets a bylaw complaint has to come in and bring their property into conformity. We need a policy if that's an injustice that, Councillor Van Elfen, well, all of us seem to think maybe perhaps results in an injustice of some kind, but we're not there yet. And I don't know. This is a tough one.
Councillor Peak.
I agree with Councillor Barkwell. In planning, there is no precedent. It's a decision that's made in concurrence with whatever the entities and the rules go by. So I certainly understand that. But consistency can make a difference for the council. So I acknowledge that as well.
Okay, well, if there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion as on the board? That includes waiving the fees. All in favor? Two in favor? And all opposed? I cast the dividing. Opposed. Councillor Barkwell.
I'll move the motion as written in the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Betts. Any discussion on this? Councillor Van Elfen.
Well, I tried, but excellent debate, and I see both sides. I truly do. So you might be prepared for a notice of motion tonight that we look at changing policy in the future. But I support the recommendation as written, and I appreciate the debate. Thank you.
Good discussion. I'll call the question to the motion on the floor. Oh, sorry, Councillor Barkwell.
Just to sort of follow up on Councillor Van Elfen, I have to say I appreciate him bringing the issue forward. Yeah.
Any other discussion?
This may seem silly, but I agree that the fact we should debate various points of view. And although I wasn't sure that I would vote for that motion, I have to grant my fellow councillor at the table an opportunity to bring that forward.
Yep, thank you. The tough ones are always tough. That's why they're tough. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries. None opposed? That carries. 9.2, just carry on.
Thank you. Our next file as another development various permit application at location 7606 Simpson Road in Summerland. This is to allow for an additional residence, carriage house, to be placed outside of the farm home plate. The said property is a split zoned property, A1 small acreage and forestry grazing, and is within our ALR. The proposal also conforms with our secondary residence regulations of the ALC. The proposal conforms with the regulations laid out by our ALC to allow a secondary residence on agricultural land. This site plan shown lays out the property and all the existing buildings with the siting of the proposed secondary home in the south corner. Excuse me. Proposed is the relocation of an existing home that is currently located at 1514 Wharf Street in Summerland to the property 7606 Simpson Road, Summerland, to be used for the purpose of a carriage home. The property is designated agricultural under our official community plan, which seeks to support residential uses that meet the needs of the farmers, limit the impact of those residencies on farm operations, and encourage higher capability lands on farming. Within the A1 zoning, a carriage house is permitted as an accessory use with a maximum size of 90 square metres, and it must be located within the farm home plate. To explain the farm home plate, the district's farm home plate regulations are as follows: 1 per lot and a maximum of 905 metres squared in A1, and a maximum coverage within that area of 45%, where possibly a 4-sided area is created, like an additional lot. Relocation of an existing home is currently located within Summerland. The location of the existing residence is on a steep incline. The driveway is also too steep to access without extensive excavation and remediation of the said property. The new location of the house is closer to the main road and in an area not currently used for farming purposes. Zoning bylaw prefers the location of a new farm home plate in areas that are immediately abutting a roadway. The area chosen to site the building could actually be used for farming and grazing purposes. But with the proximity to the road and a non-usable land next to the house, the applicant has decided that this will pose the least impact on his land. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No questions? Councillor Barkwell?
So I didn't quite, and I looked at this prior to the meeting and stuff. I couldn't quite figure out all the positioning and what's happening here. A home that's 900 square or 90 square meters, which is pretty small, is being moved from Trout Creek up into this location, past the existing home and up that driveway? Or no, that's the part where I lost it.
To Councillor Backwell through the mayor. So they are proposing to uplift the existing house on Wharf Street, and it's going to be relocated to the property. They can't move it up to where the existing house is because it's surrounded by bedrock, and the driveway up to the existing house is extremely steep. They had a house moving company do a report on the property it's to be moved to, and they said it wouldn't be possible even with the lifting of the crane. The crane wouldn't be able to do that navigation on their roadside. So they decided to put the house in the bottom south corner, as close to the road as possible.
Okay, for some reason I thought that it was going up to where there's that, you know, I didn't follow it to that point, so it's going right there, which is really the only place possible, I guess, for that particular, unless they were to build new.
Yes, to Councillor Backwell, they could possibly build new, but the applicant has said in the rationale that was actually submitted to council that this was a less expensive option, and not having the house demolished and then taken to the landfill and everything that goes with that, that they thought this would be a better solution, and to move the house to where it's going to be sited.
Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question and my concern about this, the variance allowance, is that we're talking about adding another property onto farmable land in the ALR. And it seems that these owners are not using it for farm purposes, but we're here as a council to kind of set the stage for the next 100 years of Summerland. And so building carriage homes in our ALR property, I think it's really important to try and stay within the farm home plate to really maintain our arable land. So that's really important to me. Thank you.
My apologies, I pushed the wrong button. Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you. I appreciate what Councillor Betts is saying too. I do think our ALR land is sacred, precious. In this situation, what I like about this is recycling of a building. You know, that I do appreciate. And the fact of the matter is that it is really close to the road. So it's going to have the least amount of impact, you know, close to a road, short driveway. So may take up less land there than it would maybe even around the home plate. My thoughts.
Councillor Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I make note of the fact that that although I realize that we do value the arable land on any given piece of property, that I do agree with reuse of materials, and the fact that this home can be used, moved from elsewhere and placed is a good thing. It also, I see where it minimizes the driveway footprint and allows for what other area might be used for food production that might have taken up for driveway and placement on the home plate. So I see this possibility as reinforcing this option.
Thank you. No further questions. Would somebody like to bring forward a motion? Councillor Van Elfen.
As presented.
Okay, seconder. Councillor Peak. Councillor Barkwell, discussion.
Yeah. Of course, the principle for the farm home plate is to preserve the agricultural land. And I certainly don't have a problem with buildings that are not on the farm home plate, because for situations where there is unfarmable land on property, and we have a million situations like that, lots of large properties that have areas of bedrock or slope and things like that. So this case, it's against, you know, it's totally against the principle of why we have a farm home plate. The farm home plate is a starting point. You don't have to adhere to it rigorously if there's a good spot somewhere else. But in this case, you know, the only mitigating thing it has in its favor is reusing a building. But that doesn't preserve the land, which is the objective of the farm home plate. So I don't think I can really support this, because it's not the only most common way I can think of not using the farm home plate is when there's alternative unsuitable land.
Question, if I may, was this sent to our APC?
No, for DVPs to go straight to council for approval. They're not within our terms of reference for the APC bylaw, right? The Advisory Planning Commission, sorry.
Could we?
It does state within the APC bylaw that any land use recommendations that council wants advice on from the APC, they can provide you feedback on.
Councillor Van Elfen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And maybe our planner can correct me if I'm wrong or way out in left field, but I thought with the whole concept of adding secondary dwellings to farmland, that yes, we would utilize the home plate. But if a licensed agrologist found a different location on the farm that was suitable because of limits agricultural productivity, it could go in that location. So the applicant could, by right, hire an agrologist to get a report. And if the agrologist feels that this is a good location, then I guess we're okay. But I see the applicant has his hand up in the gallery, but I'll leave that to the mayor.
Can we hear from the applicant if we all agree? Do we all agree to hear from the applicant? Yeah.
Objection. I wasn't allowed to speak at 9.1 because it's supposed to be fair for everybody.
I'll have to ask the corporate officer for
Thank you, Mayor.
guidance on this.
So the purpose of the public is for the public comment opportunity, but because this is an application before council, it's to my understanding, you can ask the applicant for clarification. As such is the same in a public hearing.
So if all of council agrees, we'll listen, hear the applicant for clarification.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor and Council. Yeah, just wanted to clarify one thing that maybe wasn't totally clear when we. Sorry, yeah, Steve Brown. My address is 7603 Happy Valley Road, and it's my brother who's the person in question. It would be moved to his property. When we did the analysis of the site, because where the house initially, where we wanted to move it in the farm plate is quite steep there, as we mentioned. The actual extra land that it would take to use to put a whole bunch of fill out to the area to be able to reach that spot in the farm plate would actually take more farm area away for grazing or whatever else it would be for tree fruits or vines, etc. So that's why when we did the calculation, it was clear that also wouldn't make any sense because we'd be building a driveway. So it's unfortunately, and it's hard to see that from the map. Like when you look at the driveway, it's like, oh, you can just plunk it right on the driveway. But if it has to be within the farm plate, if you're sticking on the far side, it's so steep you wouldn't even be like, unless you built a new house and you blasted out that area. And then the other option was the other side of the farm plate or on the other side of the house. And that, again, we weren't able to move the house there anyway. But again, even no matter what, either side, you'd have to basically, which we would be approved to do, we don't even have to get a variance for it, but then we'd be building a massive driveway out onto that slope area, which would take up a lot more actual footprint, I guess, for the farmland. So that's the justification. Just want to make sure that was clear to everyone. So we're definitely thinking of farm plate and trying to minimize that as much as possible, for sure. Thanks.
Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess because this bylaw is new, the new regulations allowing carriage house on ALR land, one thing I'd like to have a better understanding of is for residents who own these properties, is it a right to put a second property, like a carriage home on their property, or is it the right to maintain the agricultural land just in the user capacity?
I'll let our Director of Development Services answer that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there's any right to the farm owner to have the carriage house on their property. There are some farm uses that we cannot prohibit as a local government that. So grazing, typical farm uses you would expect that we can't stop a farmer from having a farm if we tried to do it through our zoning bylaw. But we do have flexibility from the Agricultural Land Commission to either limit or not limit carriage houses. That's something it's an allowable use. Now, since there are legislations that change that occurred in 2021 in July, that they can now allow a carriage house up to 90 meters squared, but it's totally discretionary to us at the local government level whether we want to be consistent with the ALC and allow for carriage houses. So we went through some bylaw amendments last summer through council as well as the agricultural community to determine if we wanted to open up our agricultural lands to carriage houses up to 90 meters squared. That is a size requirement from the ALC. And we did move forward with bylaw amendments to allow for carriage houses. But the main stipulation, when we heard from council at the time, is that it had to be included in the farm home plate with those bylaw amendments. So that's why our zoning bylaw still requires the location of the carriage house within the farm home plate. And that's also why it's a variance application to put it outside of that location, if that helps.
Councilor Betts.
Thank you. So to follow up with that, then, if the land is unsuitable in the farm home plate for a carriage home, and instead the only option is to put it in a different location on arable land, then it's up to council to make the best decision about protecting our ALR land at the end of the day, whether we're going to lose farmland in the long run, or the alternative. And so it is kind of setting precedent. Would you not think, moving forward, for other applicants who are going to come forward to us, to council, asking to build carriage homes on arable land? So,
Councilor Peak.
So my understanding is there's no precedent set in planning to do this. But my question is, on any given property, we would only be allowed to have one carriage house, is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Peak, yeah, that's correct. And right now our own bylaw states it's either a secondary suite or a carriage house. So
right.
You have to choose between those two.
Thank you. And it also has a requirement of particular square footage, so that's restricted as well. Thank you.
Councillor Barkwell.
Another question that comes to my mind, and I'm not even sure if there's a real answer, but looks like the majority of this lot is non-arable. There's some, I guess it gets steep and such, but so if you're going to put a second residence on this property, there does seem to be a lot of space, not necessarily on the farm home plate, where something could be constructed. The only wrinkle here is, does reusing a house warrant using arable land? And the people of Summerland have told us that the preservation of farmland is a priority. And is it a bigger priority than reusing a house, or could that house be reused on a different location? And I'm not really leaning towards the necessity of it here.
I guess the difficulty I have is I think we all want to be able to maximize the use of farmland. I can't tell, I guess, reading from the report and the information that I've received, of whether it impacts it or not, and what the alternatives might be. The home plate it's not an ALC thing; it's our thing, and the new rules do allow carriage houses on farmland. So that's why I personally don't feel. I wish I had more information. I wish I had an agrologist report. I wish I had a opinion from the APC that we could draw on. But having that, without that, I don't really know where to go. Councillor Van Elfen.
So would it be thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would it be appropriate then at this time to possibly table this amendment or this recommendation until we either got an agrologist report?
Yes, that would be up to the applicant for whether they wanted to get one or not. I'll refer to the corporate officer what the process would be.
Through the mayor, I mean, council can make any resolution that they would like. So if that's how they want to see the application go forward, and then it would be up to the applicant to decide whether or not they want to pursue it further.
So we have a motion on the table right now. So first we would need a motion to defer and then another motion. Can you have a motion to defer pending an agrologist report or, yeah? Yep.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just what's the difference then between getting an agrologist report versus going to the APC?
Through your worship to Councillor Betts, I think there are different perspectives. I think it's just probably the most straightforward answer. So an agrologist can provide more of a technical understanding to council as to the soil capabilities of the area that's proposed to be placed for the carriage house, determining if it's suitable for farmland or not, giving more information with regards to that to council, and maybe as well evaluating maybe other locations on the property as well, maybe not. The advice from the Advisory Planning Commission is kind of more land use advisory advice from local members of the community. We've got a number of people that work in the development industry that sit on our Advisory Planning Commission. Some local residents as well that are in tune to our development system, so they can give you advice on just like if do they have any concerns of precedent, maybe if that is more of the concern versus the technical aspects of the actual land that's being considered for. So that's kind of the different perspectives.
Good, yeah. Okay, so where does council want to go? Councillor Barkwell?
Well, if it makes one or two more comfortable, then I will put the motion to table this and or defer it until we have received a report from an agrologist on the suitability of the land where the proposed house is to be relocated, and of course it's at the applicant's pleasure whether he does that or not.
Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Betts? Any discussion? Oh, we can't discuss. Can we discuss that? Yeah. Any discussion on the second motion? Councillor Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we take a tabling and the expectation is that the landowner would have an agrologist report done, if in the timeframes that they need to move this house or whatever, that is not possible, then where does it leave the applicant? Does it still come back to us to reconsider it for the motion that is in our package?
We'll ask our planning technician.
I can answer that one. So I think that if council does move forward with this motion, it would be entirely the decision of the applicant as to how they would like to proceed. So either they would try to rush to complete an agrologist report to come back before council and to try to achieve their timing for the moving of the house. Maybe they'd find a temporary location of the house. I'm not too sure, but it'd be entirely up to the applicant to determine how they'd want to proceed. They could, decide to not put forward the variance application to council as well. So once the decision is made of council, then it's back into the applicant's court as to how they want to proceed with it, this file.
If this tabling does not pass, then we come back to this decision and the applicant takes their chances at this decision. That's correct?
Yeah, the original motion is still on the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Yeah. No further discussion. I'll call the question on tabling until we receive an agrologist report. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Peak opposed. Motion carries. Item 9.3. Shannon.
Thank you, Mayor. My final file this evening is another development variance permit. This one is for an application at 28999 Garnet Valley Road. And this variance application is to allow the front yard setback to be varied from 10 metres to 2.97. As you can see here from the site plan, the application is to allow for an existing carport to remain in its position, which is sited within the front yard setback regulations of 10 metres. The property is designated open lands agricultural under our official community plan, which seeks to support residential uses that meet the needs of the farmers, limit the impact of those residencies on farm operations, and encourages higher capability lands for farming. The property is zoned FG, which is forestry grazing. This zoning provides lands for forestry, grazing, and conservation uses. It gives an allowance of one single family home and an accessory use of a carriage home if the owner so wishes. The FG zoning forestry grazing specifies a 10-metre distance from the front yard, frontline property to the principal residence. The carport in question in this application is currently sited at 2.97 metres distance from the property line. The carport in question was actually constructed without the benefit of a building permit or a variance application. It is attached to the existing home, so it is looked at as a principal residence and is within the existing driveway. To construct the carport in another location would require additional geotechnical and geohazard reports and significant excavation on the grazing and farmland. The map here, as you can see, is a contour map that demonstrates the significant grades and challenges that exist on this property. The applicant has shown his willingness to provide construction drawings to finalise the carport under our BC Building Code regulations if the variance today is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Councillor Peak.
Thank you. As this was built without a permit, does that double the cost of the permit should it go forward?
Your worship, to Councillor Peak, yes, that's correct.
Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When was this carport built? Do we know?
This carport, as far as I've been led to believe from bylaw, was last summer. And then it was a bylaw enforcement. It was notified to our bylaw department by our building department, who was out looking at another structure in the area.
No further questions. Would somebody like to bring forward a motion? Councillor Van Elfen.
As presented.
Okay, second. Councillor Peak. Any further discussion? Councillor Van Elfen.
I appreciate Councillor Peak's observation about the doubling of the permit fee, and thank you for that reassurance. I mean, it is a small penalty, but at least it's a penalty, and people should be aware that you need a permit to build. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barkle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, considering all the variance applications and such we've had over the years, I don't have any difficulty with this one, looking at the topography of the location, and the fact that it's a considerable distance above the road. The property line kind of like is way off the paved area of the road, so there's not any traffic too close to it. It just kind of makes sense. There really isn't another location for carport there.
Thank you. No other comments. I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. That carries. 9.4, development variance permit delegation. And our Director of Development, our CO Stat will introduce this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Early in Council's mandate, direction was provided to staff to explore greater delegation of minor variances to staff in order to reduce red tape and to save money for residents. We are back today with what we believe is a good set of parameters to guide staff in the efficient administration of minor variances into the future. Making these changes now puts us in a small group of leading municipalities who have seized the opportunity created by the province to reduce regulatory burden on citizens whose plans contribute to investments in our community, some of which support housing needs in our community. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thanks, CEO Stat. I am happy as well to be in front of Council today to present our proposed bylaw amendments for the potential delegation of minor development variance permits to staff for decision making. These proposed changes will go a long way to improving our permit processing efficiency, providing quicker time frames to building permit issuance, and to help with also increasing our housing supply within our local community. So in late, so just some background, in late 2021, the province enacted Bill 26, which provided new legislative powers to local governments to choose to delegate minor development variance permits. Similar to other delegated development permits that we currently have in place, such as environmental development permits, geotechnical development permits, and high hazard development permits. These legislative changes were a key recommendation of the province's Development Approvals Process Review, or DAPR for an acronym, which was completed in 2019 to streamline development approvals, provide additional tools to local governments in managing their development approvals, and to also help increasing housing supply to deal with the provincial housing crisis. Since the enactment of this legislation last year, or a year and a half ago, I guess I should say, only a handful of local governments across BC have actually implemented the delegation of development variance permits, which are provided here for Council's benefit. However, a number of municipalities are currently under review of their bylaws right now. We're doing a review of the potential delegation of DVPs to staff. And these municipalities include the City of Penticton, Kelowna, Victoria, and Surrey are currently undergoing their reviews. So of the local governments that have adopted bylaw amendments, I've provided a bit of a table. It's in the council report as well for DVP delegation. And their approach is very widely in the type of approach taken from a regulatory perspective. Some, like the City of Fernie, took a very liberal approach to DVP delegation, and they included no neighborhood notification at all for any of their minor DVPs, and also a limited scope of delegation to staff. Others, though, like the RDOS, have a more robust community engagement and consultation period for all variances, but only council discretion if there are neighborhood concerns. Or sorry, I should say regional board, not council, if there are concerns. So if there are no neighborhood concerns, it does move to staff for decision-making and ultimately permit issuance. Of the municipalities reviewed, North Vancouver is probably the most restrictive due to the scope of delegation that's been passed down to staff. In terms of our context here in Summerland, here are the past 6 years of development variance permits issued. On average, it ranges from about 20 to 40 development variance permits per year. Currently, all of these applications are being brought forward to council for review and consideration, which includes a staff report and presentation, council review, and this process takes about 6 weeks to 2 months for an application being submitted, and it being undergoing review at the staff level, and then being brought forward to council. However, staff know that many of these previous DVPs could have been considered under staff delegation, and many of them were deemed minor by council at the time and saved both the council and the applicant time in the process. The proposed bylaw amendments before council tonight are reflective of the informal directions provided by council at a committee of the whole meeting of January 27th, 2023. Specifically, the amendments include a two-tiered approach for minor development variance permits, with one tier of minor DVPs being considered truly minor and not requiring neighborhood consultation. We are referring to those ones as type 1 minor variance applications. And then as well, another tier of minor applications that would warrant neighborhood consultation, but that a delegated staff member such as myself as the director could approve if there were no neighborhood concerns. So that's kind of the way we've created this proposed approach. Some other aspects of this approach: type 1 variances, again, which are truly minor, can be issued in a very rapid fashion, and we're hoping to hit 1 to 2 weeks of timeline for those type 1 variances. For type 2 variances, if there is any written concerns at all, and only just one written concern, the file will revert to council for decision making. It wouldn't be delegated to staff anymore. It would be diverted to council for that decision making through a council report from staff. Enforcement files, which you had 2 on your plate today, that would go straight to council. There wouldn't be any gray areas as whether there would be a staff decision or not. It would go straight to council to make that determination as to whether this DVP should be issued. We are also proposing an increase for all 3 proposed streams of development variance permits for neighborhood notification to increase the notification time period from 10 days to 15 days. The minimum for the Local Government Act is 10 days, but we can go greater than that, and we're recommending that we go up to 15 days to allow an extra week of written correspondence to be received before we issue a decision on a development variance permit. And then finally here, similar to all our other delegated development permits, which are currently reviewed by myself as the development officer for the district, if there is any applicant concerns, they can apply to council for reconsideration of the decision of the development officer. And also myself as the development officer, I can decide to punt basically any application to council if I feel like it may be controversial. And despite the criteria provided today in this proposed bylaw amendment, that council should be the one to make that decision. So I mentioned the criteria. It's included in the report. I won't go through it in detail, but I can happy to take any questions as to how we're differentiating type 1 to type 2 versus those that are going to council directly. The table here as well shows the process for each stream of development variance permit that will be taken, and also the public consultation that will occur for each stream. In terms of the 3 streams, so I mentioned kind of our current process with council taking about 6 weeks. That's our targeted timeframe. Sometimes it does go to almost 2-month period. We try to target, so around that 6-week to 2-month period. Anything that requires council review will still stick to that time frame. For type 2s, we're hoping to hit that targeted time frame of 4 weeks. And as like I mentioned, for those truly minor DVPs that we're prescribing in the bylaw, we'd be trying to target 1 to 2 weeks to issue those development variance permits. Another thing too that I'd like to point out that with the type 1 DVPs, because there's no neighborhood consultation and there isn't as much discretion, I would say, with regards to neighborhood feedback, we could consider a development variance permit and a building permit to be submitted at the same time, so that we're not slowing down the building permit process while we're waiting for a variance to be reviewed. So there should be some gains from having two application processes running around the same time frame. So the next part of the presentation here just goes through examples that council has previously seen as in their community of the whole meeting. I just wanted to re-bring those examples back in front of council and just explain where they would fall within these three streams. So the type 1 example is provided right here. This was a front yard setback variance that was issued in November of last year. It was a variance request of 13%, so going from 6 meters to 5.24. This, under the criteria we've established for type 1 variances, would be considered a type 1 of no neighborhood consultation and to be issued by the designated officer. An example of a type 2 variance would be retaining walls and fences. We actually have that specified in the proposed bylaw amendments, that retaining walls are very neighborhood specific. If there's concerns from neighborhoods on sight lines and visible impacts, shadowing, so all retaining walls and fences would still go through neighborhood consultation as a type 2. But in this case, there were no neighborhood concerns for this variance on Austin Street. So the delegated officer would be able to issue the development variance permit following the neighborhood consultation period.
Sorry, Brad, we just have a question.
No worries. Yeah.
Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to our planner. So on like the last slide, if you can bring on that one there was no public input at all, but there still would be an engineering report, no? Yes?
Through your worship to Councillor Van Alphen, yes, that's correct, because that would be required for the building permit. So the development variance permit is the first point of the process, but then we would make them get a building permit with an engineering report at that point in time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carry on. Yep.
Thank you. And just another example of a type 2. It's with regards to the farm home plate. This would be a secondary farm home plate on Monroe Avenue. It did come before council in the fall of last year. It was approved by council. There were no neighborhood concerns as well with the placement of this carriage house outside the farm home plate. And therefore, like, it would be following our type 2 process with staff decision making on following the neighborhood consultation process. And then just as a final example, this was one that was ultimately approved by council in May of 2022. But when we did circulate this variance, and it was a large variance of 91% for the proposed side yard setback, there were neighborhood concerns for the immediate adjacent landowner to the north. On that basis, like, we would have got that concern and provided it to council for decision making instead of staff making that decision. Just finally, to sum up a bit on some housekeeping items, we also have some amendments to our fees and charges bylaw. I mentioned previously our current DVP application fee is $750. But because we feel that there's a reduced level of staff involvement and staff time for both the type 2 minor variances as well as the type 1 minor variances, we're proposing to reduce those down from the $750 amount to $500 for type 2 and $250 for type 1. And then finally, we are also proposing to do, as part of this amendment bylaw, is an increase to the fee for property information requests. This was an item that was identified as part of the 2023 budget review process as an item for potential additional cost recovery, because we were expending a lot of staff time, especially with the number of property information requests we're getting from the real estate industry. on a weekly basis, that we thought maybe we can get a little more money from applicants in accessing their files, and also to cover those costs for staff time. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions from council. Thank you.
Thank you. Council questions? Councillor Betts?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would actually just like to say thank you to Brad and your team for putting the effort into taking our committee of the whole discussion and narrowing it down into some really detailed points that hopefully will streamline for our residents when they really want to try and accomplish getting some of their variance permits in place so that they can complete works on their properties in as timely a fashion as possible, and so that we can also address those ones that require more time, more staff time and council time in a more timely fashion. So I think and I hope that this change will be positive for our residents. That was the intention of council from the discussion anyway. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Peak?
I appreciate the presentation this evening, but I most appreciated the time that we spent on that whole discussion. I thought that there were concerns expressed. We had full discussion on how we felt and how we would proceed if those kind of difficulties came up. I think that when there's a new process presented to us that can create more efficiencies for both our staff and the public, I think it's very important to give them an opportunity. This can be reviewed in the future if we find difficulties in any part of this. But I just appreciate that we all had a good engagement on that day, that you took those things away and worked through them with your staff to create a report that's very understandable. I just really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Van Elfen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it was also identified through the Development Process Committee back in the day, that sometimes these variances could take a while. And like these minor ones that there's no, it's put out there, the public has no concerns, then, we can reduce time for the applicant to speed up their process. And I think that makes sense, and I appreciate the effort you guys have put in. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it certainly reflects our discussion in committee of the whole. So I appreciate all that, and we've heard loud and clear how a lot of these development processes get bogged down, and so it's a way to streamline, improve customer service, but at the same time, it allows neighbors to have their input on anything of significance, and we can address those concerns. My only question, and I don't know if it fits within the realm of this bylaw or not, but it's not so much the neighbor notification on these smaller variances or smaller properties, but it's notification of DVPs on what I would say developments of a community interest as opposed to a neighborhood interest. And those are usually the larger, higher density buildings, which impact not just the neighborhood, but really a greater area. And I mean, we're seeing it now with the Oasis, the request. And so how can we build in so we can spread the net a little bit so that it's not just the immediate neighbors we're referring to, because it's not just when you have a really large development, it's not just the immediate neighbors who are affected, it's the larger neighborhood, so to speak. And would that be separate from this, or is that a different bylaw that would cover it, or would be the same one?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that's something that council can consider. I would recommend that we look at it perhaps as a separate amendment. It's the same bylaw, first of all, to answer your question. It could be, it's in the development application procedures bylaw, but it wouldn't be necessarily specific to DVPs, perhaps, rezonings as well. temporary use permits right now. They all follow the same prescribed adjacent landowner circulation area of 60 meters is what we've set out in our bylaw. If council wants to change that based on the density of a proposed development or the impact it might have and for the community, then we could look at that at the staff level, maybe following a direction from council and make a proposed bylaw amendment specific to that change in the procedure bylaw, because then it wouldn't be just specific to DVPs, if that makes sense.
Okay. Councillor Barkwell?
I remember that issue came up during our discussions in the committee of the whole. The first instance of that sort of a situation, in my experience, was the dock at the Oasis. And it was definitely a community-wide interest thing. It technically fit all the notification requirements, but you know, it was extremely rushed. So the only improvement we see here is extending the time period for notification, because by the time people get their letters through the mail, they may not pick up the mail every day. We got a little bit extra time, so that's one step. But I agree with you that I don't know what the solution is. It could be a bit of an issue, but it's also separate and apart from the improvements that we see here. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I just think, you know, as we look to densify downtown and places like that and start to build, you know, bigger buildings with higher density, is 60 meters probably won't be enough. But Councillor Peak.
I agree with all of you, and I believe it's a separate issue. Could I bring this motion forward as stated within our reports?
Yep. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Betts. Any further discussion? Councillor Barkwell.
Since everybody else got to say how great they thought this improvement was, I want to say that but I also look at it with the experience, same as you, Mayor Holmes, you know, 9 years of sitting on and looking at development variance applications and trying to figure out how we could make this more efficient. The pressure we feel from the public all the time to make, you know, cut the red tape. This is maybe first, not the very first, but one of the biggest opportunities we've had to cut red tape in my experience. So, and the experience I have gives me comfort that maybe some people who are not necessarily as familiar with the process, that it's not going to result in anything that is untoward or causes problems with neighbors and such, or something sliding through that shouldn't, or any of those sort of concerns.
Thank you. Yeah, well said. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Moving along, we have no bylaws for adoption. Item 11, business arising. We have an item from the closed session today. I'll turn it over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Mayor Holmes. So just to note that council passed the following resolution at the February 27th, 2023 closed session of council, that council policy 800.25, COVID vaccine policy for new employees, be rescinded effective immediately.
Okay, thank you. Item 12, notice of motion. Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm hoping the corporate officer can help me wordsmith this, that maybe it'll make some sense. But regarding our 9.1 agenda item tonight and the discussion we had around that, I'd like to see if we could develop a policy that could address buildings on in our community. I'll include all of our community, I guess, or if somebody wants, or ALR lands that are older existing buildings on these lands that may be encroaching on property lines that in the future, if they're brought forward in a bylaw type complaint and the owner of the building hasn't done anything wrong, that we do not charge them for variance.
So did you want to bring that notice that you're going to introduce that motion at the next meeting?
Yes, please, and thank you.
So then you can work with the corporate officer on wording of the motion that we'll bring
Thank you.
forward next meeting. Perfect. But we've all been put on notice. Any other notices of motion? No items removed from the consent. Councillor reports. Any councillor have a report? Councillor Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two things. I was very pleased to attend a public meeting regarding the opportunity of a rezoning for both an apartment and a hotel. And I want to commend the community at being very well attended. Lots of important questions put forward. And the people that came stayed for the whole time for the presentation. So that's the kind of involvement I want to see from our community. It was terrific. The other thing I want to do is also thank the chamber for all the nomination recipients or the recipients for nominations coming together and having that grand celebration, because if you're a winner, you come out for the awards dinner, but if you're not the winner, then you don't get that chance to mingle and trade off ideas with your neighbor and to be acknowledged. So I think this pre-time of getting together is wonderful. The waterfront was a great place to do it in, and it's certainly well enjoyed by the community. It was a terrific evening.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Summerland Secondary School for putting on such an excellent production of Anastasia. I was able to take my grade 1 daughter, and that was the second time she saw the show. And I just commend all of the hard work. Secondly, thank you to the staff at the arena who helped out so much with the Can Skate Figure Skating Carnival over the weekend on Sunday. They just did so much decorating and it far exceeded my expectations. They did a great job, and I would like to thank the staff at the arena for their help with that event. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And speaking of SSS, I just read today that the senior boys basketball team won the Valleys. Yeah, which is awesome for them. That's amazing. Councillor Van Alphen.
Something that's really important, and it's my 6-year-old grandson, Kingston Van Alphen, scored his first goal in hockey. So I just want to keep the more important things coming forward here. Thank you.
It's one more goal than you ever scored, right? Okay, anyone else? No? This is the public comment period. So we have a few people registered. First, I'll ask Christy Johnson to come up. Just if you could just state your name and civic address. And,
Hi, my name is Christy Johnson. I live at 6501 Canyon View Road. Today I want to ask a question to the council and to staff regarding clarification of the recent proposal that property owners are going to be bearing a cost of $3,500 for a water meter for domestic services. As a property owner, I would like the record to state that my concern is not regarding paying for water, it's regarding paying for a meter that's going to generate revenue for the district. So my questions are, I've got 5. 1, at the time that the district installed meters onto other domestic second services, why were 240 properties excluded from the initial installation and not included in the district provided meters? My second question is, the letter of February 15th states option 2A and 2B will cost the property owners $3,500. Is that the total cost for all property owners in Summerland, regardless of the location of services and the scope of work involved? 3, are folks who live along sections of roadway already under works being charged for the same price too, i.e. Giants Head Road? And I understand that Canyon View is also slated for road construction, so I'm wondering if that cost is going to be the same to us. 4, if property owners choose option 1, will the district disconnect the domestic second services at Corporation main stop or at the Corporation curb stop? And my 5th question is, those who choose to have the meter installed, will they pay an additional basic fee as well as the original basic fee and the consumption, or will it be included into one rate?
Okay, thank you very much. If you could just give your questions, I guess, to the corporate officer there, and someone will get back to you about that.
Do you want my cue cards? Yeah, okay, I can provide them to him.
Okay, thank you very much.
So he'll be emailing me them? Okay, perfect, thank you.
Next, I have Murray Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really had wanted to speak to 9.1 before the decision by council was made. I really do wonder whether or not you read my written submission. The written submission identified a number of points that councillors erred in. This is not the same use of that land that was being used. The original owner, who built it without permit, had 1 to 2 horses, and they used that land very carefully. They cleaned it up. They cleaned it twice a day. The current owner has had multiple cows, chickens, and 1 or 2 horses. If you'd taken a look at my written submission, you would have seen the mess that the animal confinement area is in adjoining the creek. The staff were in error in indicating, first off, that there would required Ms. Drescher to have environmental report done. I found out at 10 o'clock this morning that actually it didn't have to be done, and they said that it was because of the Farm Practices Protection Act. However, they didn't recognize that also as part of that is where management practices don't meet the standards, and that was as prescribed by the Code of Practice for Agricultural Environment Management. If they don't meet that, then the farm practices standard doesn't meet. And my hypothetical that I used in the case of 9.4 was thinly veiled, actually relating to 9.1. So staff has made a number of errors in it, and you've based your decision in error. And as a consequence of those errors and failure to read my submission, what you've done is you've created a situation. I'm not going to stop, because what you've done is you've created a situation where you now have made it more difficult for me to go ahead and actually do what's supposed to be done.
I have to ask you to wrap up, Mr. Rooney.
I will. However, if you'd also read my other aspect, why would we follow your rules and regulations when the only thing that is consistently reported on is that if I speak more than 2 minutes, I get shut down?
Thank you. Next on the list, I have Marianne McDonald.
Do I need to state my name and address and all that?
For the record, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Mary Ann McDonald, 6505 McDonald Place. I recognize many factors influence council's decision making, and that growth management issues reach beyond individual local governments at times. The RDOS Regional Growth Strategy Committee has identified Summerland as a primary growth area, and from their presentation to council last year, it appears they would like to have a 100% increase in Summerland's population. So I am wondering if council has a vision for what Summerland will look like in 5, 10, or 20 years. Is the vision to have a sporadic house high rises like the city to our south, or will it look more like West Kelowna? And what type of residents are you trying to attract? Council past and present has stated they want to attract families, especially those with children. We all know that a healthy student population is important to the viability of any community. We do have a great deal of infill happening with secondary suites, carriage houses, apartments, etc. And there's a lot of talk surrounding walkable mixed-use neighborhoods. And as stated in the OCP, economic sustainability is critical to the prosperity of the community. But what is economic sustainability? I hope decisions that come before council for future land uses and increased densification will be given a great deal of thought. And you, as council members, will reflect on why you have chosen to live in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all on my list. Does anybody else like to speak, please? Thank you.
It was recently announced that the provincial government's planning to give a lot of money out in grants. If the district receives grant money from that big batch, I believe it's 1 billion, are you putting that money towards replacing the pier? Can you assure voters you will put that money towards replacing the pier?
Sorry, I'm not answering questions.
Is this question period or no?
Comment period.
I thought public question and comment.
We haven't heard, I'm not answering. I'll talk to you later about it. Happy to.
Certainly. Okay, and I just want to address a little bit of Marty's hypocrisy today. With respect to agenda item 9.1, if the variance is granted, they still get to keep the building. It was built without a permit. The reduced setbacks were from 15 meters to 1.28. And it just seems like you're giving special favors to someone because you might have a relationship with them. Because there was another variance in Garnet Valley today where you supported double permit fees where it was built without permits. And also you're asking 240 property owners to pay $3,500 for these water meters. So it just kind of stuck out that you're picking one property to waive it. I mean, just calling a spade a spade. And I'm concerned about what you guys approved today with the variances. Where does Brad Dolavat draw the line with a minor variance? You can still do everything without the delegated power. Only 5 municipalities are on this. There's a lot of potential problems and there's a lack of accountability. And frankly, it puts way too much power in Brad Dolavat's hands when he has a history of acting in bad faith and breaching district policy. And I have documents to support that. So why would he be rewarded with more power?
Please.
That's my point.
Okay, thank you.
It's just another example of you deferring authority instead of leading by example. Thank you.
Do we have anyone else who would like to make a comment? Is there anybody online, corporate officer? Nobody online. So I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Barkwell, all in favor? That carries. Thank you.